very wise woman told me not to forget my cup of tea. Good day, creator friends. I hope this finds you well and ready to be inspired. In this video, I'm making 4 greeting card fronts with watercolor and what I now refer to as silhouette doodling. I first attached an 8 by 10 inches piece of Arches cold press, 140-pound watercolor paper with washi tape, and I'm using a kitchen glass cutting mat, yes, as a surface to glue my paper down. And then I used more washi tape to divide the paper into 4 equal parts, as well as mask each section to add a sentiment later. And then I prepped my paint palette because I'm going to be using an extra large brush, and it's kind of difficult to get into the half pans with this big brush. So I'm using a number 6 round just to prepare the colors that I intend to use, and I'll make sure that I have enough or close to enough for the whole project. As usual, you'll find a list of the colors that I'm using as well as all the other supplies in the description of this video. Pretty much every time I do a project, I like to swatch the colors on a piece of scrap watercolor paper, preferably the same paper that I'll be using for the project. And I do this just to see if the colors will play nice together, because I know I will not let each color dry before applying the next. So these will merge on the paper. And I know I have a violet and a green, which usually creates brown. But from experience, I know that rose of ultramarine and green gold play well together. So I didn't mind that. And here is the big brush that I'll be using for this project. This is a new brush that I have recently acquired. And I do this, meaning I use a large brush when I want to remain as loose as possible and not create anything that resembles an object that we can identify. So you've seen me in the past use flat brushes, large flat brushes. This one is oval, and I love the added bonus of having a rounded edge. So it can be used in many different ways. I can make thin lines by using it just at the very tip of it, and then I can angle the brush a little bit more to create a thicker line, and then I can just tap the brush with just on its side like this and create these rounded shapes, which are quite fun to use. And I've been playing around with it a little bit, and you can also make fun petals for a large bold flower. So I'm going to experiment a little bit more with this brush, but so far I'm really liking it. I like the way that it soaks up a lot of liquid, so lots of fun. And what I was trying to do with this, and see, lots of liquid, and it started dripping, and my first instinct was, oh no, but I just let it do its thing. What I wanted to create was a background that was going from one section to the other without any break, and I was trying not to pay attention to these 4 washi tapes that I had masked for the sentiment to add on the card front. But at the same time, I was mindful of adding colors that would go really close to that section, because in order for all the colors to, how can I explain this? If you're too careful around the washi tape and you don't add any color that starts from one side of the tape to the other, it does create kind of like, not an empty spot, but the area that you've masked will no longer be anchored to the rest of the painting. I hope this makes sense, but that was my thought process while I was doing this. Now these little tap things I didn't like, and so what I did is I rinsed my, just to give you a close-up of my mistakes, what I did after I was done, I rinsed my brush, and so the brush was clean, and then I went over these little marks, I guess, with water, and then I used a tissue to blot them. It's not a mistake, but these little patterns had just happened, so the paint didn't really have time to soak into the paper properly, so I was able to pick them up. There's a bit of a ghosting effect, but I didn't mind that. I don't know, the background is so fluid, and these little marks were too rigid for the rest of the background, so that's why I decided to get rid of them. So as I'm working on the background, I'm checking to see if the colors are not repeated, but I'm looking at each section individually and see, am I missing any blue somewhere? Should I add a bit of purple? And again, it's always the same thing when I do a background like this. I'm very mindful of not blending too much the colors, because you kind of want to have them distinct so it doesn't look like a one big uniform color. And I also find that adding those lines, those curves, also helped bring everything together. And for that, I use just the tip of the brush, like I didn't angle it. Once I was happy with the background, I let everything dry. I let it air dry and went on a kind of like a tea break, I guess. And it took about an hour for everything to dry. Of course, you can speed up the process by using a heat tool, but because I had washi tape there, and washi tape is not as permanent as regular artist tape, I was afraid that if I heat set, the whole thing would start lifting. Next came the doodling part. I used the Signo DX gel pen in the size 0.28 millimeter, which gives me this beautiful, nice thin line that I like. On each of the card fronts, I went with branches and leaves, and I made sure that all of them were a bit different. And during that process, I made sure to go over the masked area, just like when I was adding the paint. The reason why I call these silhouette doodles is because I filled all of the designs with black, so that gives them the look of silhouette shapes. I did this to add contrast and also to balance against the very colorful background. And to add the black, I used the Pentel pocket brush pen for the leaves that were more pointy, and Pigma Micron pen for the ones that were a bit more rounded. And I did that for expediency, obviously, because if I had continued with the Signo DX, it would have taken me way too long. Join me in this reverence of gold watercolor paint. A moment of silence, please. So I added gold dots to 2 of the card fronts, not too many, just because again the background is so heavy with color that I didn't want to add more confusion. And the other 2 card fronts will get white dots. I think I'm going to add those towards the end because I completely forgot. Some of the card fronts didn't have enough leaves. They were getting lost in the background, so I ended up adding them. I didn't film the process. It's basically the same thing repeated, the same thing as I did before. And now I'm going to remove the washi tape. Now, using the washi tape was a suggestion from one of you. I can't remember who, of course. I never remember. And it worked really well. However, I noticed during the painting process that some of the tape was starting to lift off the glass. So if I were to do a painting that required more liquid than that, I don't think I would be using washi tape. But it totally works well for this because I wasn't working on super wet paper. So there are the card fronts in one single sheet. Of course, I need to cut those down, and for this I'm using a paper trimmer. I always get questions about my paper trimmer, so I will also list it in the description. I have an older model, but you can easily find it or find the newer model on Amazon. And the card fronts usually measure, and I say usually because I've had to trim them a little bit. They usually measure 4 by 5 1/4 because a regular size card, if you cut into an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock, is 4 1/4 by 5.5. And I always like to leave a little bit of a border around the card fronts. So for the next step, I'm going to be using 2 pieces of kraft cardstock. Again, they measure 8.5 by 11, and each of them will be cut on the long side at 5.5. And then I will fold them with the blade that I have for scoring. And again, not everybody has that, so you can use either a bone folder or a ruler with some sort of sharp but not cutting object. And just make a crease at the 4 1/4 mark. And to fold the cards, this is something that I keep repeating, but I think it's essential. When you're doing a scoring mark on paper, we have a tendency to fold with the bump from the outside, but it should be the opposite. I'm going to give you a quick close-up of what it should look like when you fold it. So just remember that the bump always goes on the inside of the fold. So here I'm showing the bump, and I will fold that left piece over the right piece. To add the sentiment, obviously I've written it with a lead pencil first, just to make sure I wouldn't mess up. So I just traced a very light line and then wrote the message. I did 2 with thank you, and the other one is just a note. And so I'm just using my best interpretation, yes, my best rendition of calligraphy. I'm not a calligrapher, but I think I did pretty okay. And then I'm going to use the Signo DX gel pen, the same pen that I use for the doodling, to add or to go over those lines. And then I'm going to do my usual foligraphy, which is to thicken up all the downstrokes of each of those letters. So with the exception of the white dots that I'll be adding, we're pretty much done here. I really love how these 4 cards have turned out, and I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out the description for the list of supplies and for the links to my social media. Thank you all so very much for watching. I'd like to thank my awesome patrons for their support of my creative journey on Patreon. Patreon is an online platform where patrons offer financial support, and in return they get exclusive benefits such as extra videos, exclusive videos, work in progress photos, crazy drawings from my sketchbook. My patrons will know what I'm talking about, and other extra tips that I like to share. You'll find a link to my Patreon page in the description of the video as well. And on that note, please stay safe and healthy, be mindful and accepting of others, keep creating, and I will see you soon.